The sound of rolling suitcases echoed through the glass corridors of Chicago O'Hare Airport that morning, a familiar chaos of motion and chatter. Emma Calloway walked briskly through the terminal, clutching her boarding pass like it was both a ticket and a lifeline. She had taken hundreds of flights before assignments, photo shoots, documentaries, but something about Flight 237 felt oddly heavy. Maybe it was the gray sky pressing against the terminal windows, or maybe it was the faint vibration in her chest that she couldn't quite explain. At 29, Emma was a photojournalist who had learned to live between destinations. Airports were her second home, cameras her only constant. She'd been sent to Seattle to cover an environmental restoration project routine work, nothing dangerous this time. But as she glanced at the boarding screen flashing Gate C-21, Flight 237 to Seattle, on time, a strange unease ran through her. She brushed it off, telling herself it was just exhaustion. Emma moved with practiced ease through the boarding line, earbuds in, camera bag over her shoulder. The smell of burnt espresso and airplane fuel filled the air. A flight attendant with a perfect bun smiled and said, "Good morning, ma'am." "Welcome aboard." "Morning," Emma murmured, barely looking up. She stepped inside the aircraft, the recycled air already cool and dry, humming with life and machinery. The rows of seats stretched ahead like a tunnel. Families, businessmen, couples all, settling into their miniature worlds for the next few hours. Emma found her place, 21A, window seat, left side. She dropped her backpack, slid her camera bag beneath the seat, and exhaled. Outside the oval window, service trucks moved like clockwork. Fuel lines hissed. A ground worker gave a thumbs up. Everything was as it should be: predictable, organized, safe. But Emma had lived long enough behind a lens to know that the most ordinary scenes often hid the most extraordinary moments. She pulled out her camera and snapped a few idle shots. A boy pressing his nose against the window, the flight attendants adjusting overhead bins, sunlight spilling like liquid gold across the aisle. The world felt peaceful until she heard the voice. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Hayes speaking. We'll be departing shortly for Seattle. Weather's fair along most of our route, though we might hit a bit of rough air near Montana. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." The captain's voice was calm, professional, yet beneath the smooth tone, Emma heard something else. A slight tremor. The kind of quiver she'd learned to catch in interviews when someone was hiding something behind a smile. It was subtle, but it stuck in her mind like a splinter. She frowned, glanced at the couple beside her, a middle-aged man in a business suit and a woman knitting quietly. Neither seemed to notice anything unusual. "Maybe I'm overthinking," she whispered to herself, sliding her phone to airplane mode. The doors closed with a hiss. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration, the synchronized choreography she'd seen countless times. But her attention lingered on the front of the plane, on the unseen man speaking with that steady yet strained voice. As the engines roared to life, Emma felt the familiar pull against her chest as the plane began taxiing down the runway. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass, watching the terminal drift away, replaced by wide-open sky. For a moment, everything felt still. The jet engines surged, the world blurred, and Flight 237 lifted into the morning light. 20 minutes later, the cabin had settled into quiet rhythm. The mother across the aisle whispered softly to her daughter, who was coloring with a pink crayon. A young man in row 23 scrolled through his tablet, mouthing words from a movie. Behind Emma, someone laughed at a podcast. Normalcy wrapped in metal and clouds. She sipped her coffee lukewarm, bitter, and opened her notebook. Notes for her Seattle assignment sprawled across the page in quick, precise handwriting. Interview Dr. Lantham. Capture restoration zone footage. Sunrise shots over Lake Union. She was halfway through jotting down ideas when the first shudder hit. The entire plane jolted like something had struck it. Cups rattled, pens rolled, a child yelped. Then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the cabin. Emma's hand froze mid-sentence. Turbulence wasn't unusual, but this early in the flight? Not this sharp. She looked out the window. The sky was a patchwork of gray and blue, calm as far as she could see. Yet something about the sound, a low, mechanical groan, didn't feel like air pockets. Her eyes flicked toward the flight attendants. The woman near the galley had paused, eyes darting toward the cockpit, before forcing a smile and continuing to pour orange juice for a passenger. That split second of hesitation told Emma more than words ever could. Something was off. She leaned back, fingers drumming on her armrest. A journalist's instinct was like a sixth sense. She could feel tension, sense the moment before disaster or revelation. Her heartbeat picked up. Another small jolt came. Then a faint flicker above the seatbelt sign flashed twice before staying solidly on. Just turbulence, she muttered under her breath, but her tone lacked conviction. An announcement crackled overhead, slightly distorted. "This is your captain. Nothing to worry about, folks. Just a patch of rough air. Please remain seated." The captain's voice had changed deeper, slower, as if he were choosing each word carefully. Emma frowned again. Her hand reached for her camera. Not to take pictures, just something about holding it steadied her. Her father had always said, "The world looks calmer through a lens, kiddo. You control the frame." He'd been a pilot once. One of the best, before the accident. Emma hadn't thought about him in years, but suddenly, sitting there in seat 21A, she felt his absence like a shadow over her shoulder. The flight attendant passed by, checking seatbelts. Emma stopped her. "Everything okay?" The woman's professional smile faltered for a millisecond before she said, "Perfectly fine, Mom. Just some early turbulence." But her eyes told another story. 10 minutes later, the coffee cart rattled down the aisle. Passengers had begun to relax again, laughter trickling back into the cabin. Emma tried to focus on her notes, but her eyes kept drifting toward the front of the plane. The cockpit door opened briefly, just a sliver, but enough for her to glimpse, flashing red lights on the console before it closed again. Her stomach tightened. She thought about standing up, about asking someone what was happening, but stopped herself. No, don't start panic where there might be none. She exhaled, deep and slow, and turned to the window again. Outside, clouds stretched endlessly, a calm ocean of white. The sun dipped slightly, painting gold streaks across the horizon. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. And yet, for reasons she couldn't name, Emma Calloway couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere above those clouds, fate had just fastened its seatbelt beside her. The hum of the engines had settled into a steady rhythm when the first flash appeared outside the window. Not lightning, but something metallic, brief, like a spark in the sky. Emma Calloway blinked and leaned closer to the glass. Nothing. Just clouds rolling thick and white beneath the wings. She exhaled, telling herself she'd imagined it, that her nerves were still wound tight from earlier. The plane continued to climb, banking gently left. The flight attendants resumed their routine, wheeling the beverage cart down the aisle, their smiles rehearsed but polite. Emma watched them carefully, noting the slight tremor in one attendant's hand as she poured coffee for an elderly man. Small details told stories. That was her gift. The smile was there, but not in the eyes. Something was definitely wrong up front. She opened her notebook again, trying to distract herself. Half-finished notes about her upcoming Seattle assignment stared back at her, but the words meant nothing now. She couldn't focus. Every creak of the fuselage, Every vibration through the armrest seemed magnified. Then came the sound. A deep metallic bang, sharp and sudden, echoed from beneath the cabin floor. The entire aircraft shuddered violently. Drinks spilled, gasps filled the air, and one child started crying. The flight attendants froze mid-step, then sprinted toward the cockpit. Emma's instincts kicked in. She grabbed her seatbelt, tightening it hard across her waist, then looked around. The Marine behind her, a broad-shouldered man with faded tattoos on his arms, reached up to steady the overhead bin as it rattled loose. "Easy, everyone," he shouted, voice firm but calm. "Stay seated." But his calm didn't last long. A loud alarm, sharp, continuous, began wailing through the speakers. Oxygen masks dropped with a sudden hiss, dangling like pale ghosts from above. Panic detonated. People screamed. Some reached for masks, others froze completely. A mother clutched her child so tight the little girl's cry was muffled against her shoulder. The lights flickered once, twice, before the cabin dimmed to emergency glow. Emma's fingers shook as she pulled the mask over her face. The elastic snapped against her cheek. The bitter smell of oxygen filled her nose. Through the crackle of the intercom came a man's voice, strained, broken by static. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your co-pilot." Weave, then silence. Nothing but the groan of metal and the ragged breath of 200 terrified souls. Emma's pulse thudded in her ears. She forced herself to look toward the front. One of the attendants stumbled back into view, face pale, hand pressed against her earpiece. She said something to another crew member that Emma couldn't hear over the noise. Both of them vanished toward the cockpit again. The Marine, she'd later learn his name was Jack, turned toward Emma. "You okay?" Yeah," she said automatically, though her chest felt tight. "What was that?" He shook his head, eyes narrowed. "Doesn't sound like turbulence." Another jolt hit. This one harder. The cabin dropped, like the floor had vanished for half a second, and every stomach lurched upward. Screams erupted again. The overhead lights flickered, and one of the compartments burst open, spilling luggage into the aisle. Emma gripped her seat so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Her heart raced. Her mind flashed back to her father, teaching her about flight physics when she was 12, about lift, thrust, and how quickly both could disappear. If an engine fails, he'd said once, you can feel it in your bones before you hear it. She felt it now. The left side of the plane vibrated differently, uneven, almost lopsided. Outside the window, smoke streaked past. Her stomach turned cold. The intercom crackled again, distorted but urgent. "Mayday. This is Captain Hayes of Flight 237. Engine 1 failure. Repeat, Engine 1 is down." Static swallowed the rest. The Marine swore under his breath. "Jesus," someone whispered behind them. "We're gonna die." "No, we're not," Jack barked. "Seatbelts on. Stay put. Do not move unless the crew tells you." His tone cut through the panic, part soldier, part leader. Emma was grateful for it. But her mind wouldn't stop spinning. She reached for her camera instinctively, recording video as if documenting the chaos would make it less real. Through the lens, she saw trembling hands, the terrified eyes of strangers, the surreal dance of light and shadow in a falling plane. But she couldn't focus for long. A deafening boom rattled through the fuselage, followed by the unmistakable sound of grinding metal. The cabin tilted sharply left, sending a tray of cups flying. The flight attendants fought to stay upright, gripping seatbacks for balance. One of them shouted over the noise, "Brace positions. Heads down, stay down." Emma's breathing quickened. She followed the instructions, pressing her forehead to the seat in front of her. The sound of sobbing, praying and cursing filled the air. She wanted to close her eyes and vanish, to wake up on the ground safe as if this had been a nightmare. But something deep inside her, that investigative instinct, that stubborn pulse of curiosity and courage, refused to surrender. She needed to understand what was happening. She lifted her head just enough to see over the seat. Smoke was seeping faintly from the seams of the cockpit door. Her heart dropped. Jack noticed too. "That's not good," he muttered. One of the attendants stumbled past them, coughing. Emma grabbed her arm. "What's going on?" The woman hesitated, eyes wide. "Engine's gone? We're trying to restart it. Please, stay calm." Emma's voice cracked. "Are we going down?" The attendant didn't answer. She just ran toward the rear of the plane to help a passenger who'd fainted. The oxygen masks swung gently from above, tapping against heads, a surreal rhythm against the chaos. Then the plane stabilized slightly, a momentary stillness, like the world was holding its breath. For one heartbeat, Emma thought maybe they'd recovered. Maybe this nightmare was over. Then the captain's voice came again, faint but steady this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've suffered an engine failure and are descending to a lower altitude. Please remain seated and keep your masks on. We have the situation under control." The reassurance sounded calm, too calm, almost practiced. Emma knew that tone well. She'd used it in interviews when pretending everything was fine. The plane leveled. The shaking subsided to a low rumble. Some passengers began whispering prayers of thanks. A few even laughed nervously. But Emma didn't relax. Something inside told her the story wasn't done. It was only pausing before the next chapter. Her gaze drifted once more to the cockpit door. Behind it, she imagined Captain Hayes, sweat on his brow, hands gripping the controls, eyes darting between flickering instruments. A man fighting gravity itself. And though she couldn't hear him, she could almost feel the tension in his voice when he spoke again. Quieter now, more personal, as if not meant for passengers, but for the world beyond the static. "Mayday. Mayday, we've lost Engine 1. Engine 2 unstable. Request immediate emergency landing clearance. Please." The transmission cut off mid-sentence. Then came the silence. Not the kind of silence that comforts, but the kind that screams. The hum of the engines faded to a hollow roar. The air pressure shifted. The lights dimmed again, and Emma's stomach flipped. She looked out the window, and what she saw made her blood freeze. The left engine was on fire. Flames licked the wing, right against the endless blue. Someone screamed. Another person started praying aloud. The flight attendants grabbed fire extinguishers, but they could do nothing from inside. Emma's hands shook as she filmed it, whispering under her breath, "This can't be happening." But it was. And in that burning reflection, she saw her own face in the glass, pale, terrified, but alive. Outside, the fire grew brighter. The plane dipped lower, its shadow cutting across clouds like a wounded bird. And as she stared out the window in seat 21A, Emma Calloway didn't know that within the next hour, the fate of every life on that plane would rest in her trembling hands. The air inside the cabin was thick, with fear, with smoke, with the silence that follows panic when everyone's waiting for someone else to move first. Emma Calloway sat frozen in 21A, her hands trembling over the camera she hadn't realized she was still holding. The screen was cracked now, smeared with coffee and fingerprints. It didn't matter. She wasn't documenting a story anymore. She was living inside one. Outside, flames flickered along the left wing, bright and unreal against the thin, ghostly clouds. The engine's roar was uneven, coughing and wheezing like a dying animal. The smell of burnt oil seeped faintly into the cabin. Somewhere behind her, a baby wailed, sharp, endless, desperate. The intercom crackled again. A faint voice broke through, distorted by static. "This is Captain Hayes. We are attempting to stabilize. Remain calm." A loud pop echoed through the plane. The lights blinked off for half a second before humming back to life. Screams erupted again, but were quickly drowned out by the captain's voice, harsher this time, barely audible. "Flight control, this is Delta 237 declaring emergency. Co-pilot down. Repeat, co-pilot unconscious. Request immediate." The transmission cut off mid-word. Emma's stomach sank. "Co-pilot down?" The attendant from earlier, the one with the trembling hands, stumbled down the aisle, trying to keep balance as the plane lurched. Her hair was loose now, her composure gone. "We need a medic," she shouted. "Anyone with medical experience, please." A middle-aged man 2 rows up raised his hand. "I'm a nurse." She pointed toward the cockpit. "We need you up front now." The man unbuckled, bracing himself against the shaking walls as he made his way forward. Emma watched him disappear through the narrow door. A few seconds later, muffled shouting came from the front, then a metallic thud. Jack, the Marine, turned toward her. His face was pale but focused, his jaw locked tight. "This is bad," he muttered. Emma swallowed hard. "He said the co-pilot's unconscious." "Yeah, which means the captain's flying alone, if he's still up." The cabin dipped again, this time steeper. Drinks, bags, and phones slid across the floor. The woman across the aisle clutched her daughter so tightly the child whimpered in pain. Emma reached over and touched her arm. "It's okay," she said, though her voice trembled. "She's okay? Just breathe." The woman nodded, tears streaking down her face. Another jolt. Another sickening drop in altitude. The oxygen masks still dangled, swaying gently like pendulums marking the seconds they had left. Emma's mind was a blur, half of her screaming to stay still, the other half desperate to do something. And then, without warning, the cockpit door opened. The sound of alarms and static-filled radio calls poured out into the cabin. The nurse stumbled out, pale, holding a headset. "The captain needs help," he shouted. "The co-pilot's not breathing. Heart failure. He's gone." A collective gasp rippled through the passengers. The flight attendants froze in shock. "He needs someone in the cockpit now," the nurse added. Jack stood up. "I'll go," he said immediately, but before he could move, one of the attendants stopped him. "No, we need someone who understands aviation, at least a little." "The systems are." Then the intercom clicked again. The voice was faint, weak, rasping through static. "Seat 21A, Emma Calloway. Come forward." For a heartbeat, the cabin went still. Emma blinked, confused. "What? Did he just say your name?" Jack asked. Her throat tightened. "No, that can't be. Seat 21A. The captain's voice came again, slower now. "Emma Calloway. Come to the cockpit. Please." Heads turned. Passengers stared. Some with fear, some with hope. Emma's pulse thundered. "Why me?" she whispered. The flight attendant moved closer, gripping her shoulder. "He said your name, ma'am." "You need to go." I can't," Emma stammered. "I'm not, please." The attendant pleaded. "He asked for you specifically. Something's wrong with him. He can't fly alone." Jack stepped into the aisle, steadying her arm. "You can do this," he said firmly. "Whatever he needs, you go find out." Emma's legs felt like they belonged to someone else as she stood, steadying herself against the seats. The aisle stretched ahead like a tunnel. Every pair of eyes followed her as she moved forward, the plane rocking beneath her. The smell of burning metal grew stronger the closer she got. She reached the cockpit door. The nurse was there, holding it half open. "He said he knows you," he murmured. "Said your father trained him once." Emma's breath caught. "My father?" The nurse nodded. "Hurry, he's fading." Emma stepped inside. The cockpit was chaos. Red and amber warning lights blinked across every panel. Smoke curled faintly near the base of the throttle. Outside, lightning streaked across the distant sky. Captain Hayes sat slumped in his chair, blood on his temple, one hand still clutching the control yoke. His uniform was soaked with sweat, his eyes half open but determined. He turned his head slowly toward her. "You came?" His voice was weak, barely above a whisper. Emma froze. "Captain." What's happening?" "Engine 1's gone." "Engine 2's?" "Barely holding," he rasped. "Altitude dropping. I can't hold her much longer." The radio crackled beside him, a voice shouting from ground control. "Flight 237, do you read?" "Respond, Flight 237. Hayes ignored it, locking eyes with her. "Your father." "Mark Calloway," he murmured. "He trained me 20 years ago. Said his daughter had the instincts for flight." Emma's lips trembled. He died in a crash." "I know." Hayes coughed, spitting blood into his sleeve. "But he saved my life that day. And now, you're going to save theirs." She stared at him, uncomprehending. "What are you saying?" He reached over, fingers trembling, and pressed a switch. The autopilot light flickered and went dark. The plane dipped sharply. "Captain!" Emma shouted, grabbing the seat to steady herself. He coughed again, forcing the words out. "You're the only one who knows what to do. Even if you don't believe it yet. I can't fly this thing." She cried. "I took a few lessons years ago, in a simulator. That's it." "You know enough." His eyes were glassy now, his breathing shallow. "Listen to me, Emma. I can't. Stay conscious much longer. Air control will guide you. Jack can assist. But you need to take the controls." Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. No, you can't be serious." He smiled faintly, the tired, knowing smile of a man who's already seen the end. "You were born for this. Your father told me so." The alarm screamed louder. Altitude warnings, stall warnings, overlapping chaos. The plane tilted again. Hayes grabbed her wrist, pulling her hand to the yoke. "You feel that? The vibration?" He whispered. "That's the plane telling you she's still alive." Emma's breath came in shallow gasps. Her palms were slick with sweat. The yoke was cold, rigid, alive. Hayes leaned close, voice breaking. "You're the pilot now." For a second, she thought she misheard. But the words were clear, low, final, and echoing in the storm of alarms. Then his hand slipped from hers, falling lifeless to his lap. The captain was gone. Emma stared at him, horror flooding through her. The plane lurched violently, a long stomach-twisting drop. The radio crackled again. "Flight 237, your altitude is critical." "Who's flying that plane?" "Respond immediately." Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She gripped the yoke, feeling the full weight of the aircraft through her shaking arms. This is Emma Calloway," she stammered into the radio. "Passenger. Seat 21A. The captain's, he's unconscious. I need help." There was a stunned pause. Then the air traffic controller's voice came, steady but urgent. "Copy that, Emma. We're going to get you home. I need you to listen very carefully. Are your hands on the controls?" She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Yes. Good, the voice said. Then, Miss Calloway, you're the pilot now. Emma swallowed hard, tears burning her eyes. Outside, the clouds stretched endlessly below, and the lives of 200 people hung in her trembling hands. The cockpit was an orchestra of chaos. Alarms screaming, lights flashing in frantic rhythm, metal trembling under pressure. Emma Calloway sat frozen, hands gripping the control yoke as the Boeing 737 shuddered through the clouds like a wounded bird trying to stay aloft. Her breath came in ragged bursts. The captain's blood still glistened faintly on her fingers. He's gone. He's really gone. The thought struck her like a blade, but there was no time to mourn. The plane was descending fast. The radio crackled again, a calm yet urgent voice from the ground filling the room. Flight 237. This is Atlanta Center. Emma, do you read? Her throat tightened, but she forced her voice out. Yes, I read you. Good, the controller said. I need you to stay calm and follow my instructions carefully. We're tracking your descent. You're losing altitude rapidly. What's your airspeed? Emma squinted at the flashing instruments, but the numbers blurred together. I don't know, there are so many dials. Look to your left, center console. Small gauge labeled IAS. What does it say? She scanned the chaotic dashboard, found the label, and gasped. 250 knots. Okay, the voice said. That's fast, but manageable. Pull back gently on the yoke, not too much. You need to level the wings. Her hands trembled. She pulled slightly, and the plane lurched upward, throwing her stomach into her throat. Too much, Emma. Ease off, ease off. She exhaled, adjusting her grip, trying again. The motion steadied, the shuddering softened. The nose lifted slightly, and the horizon line on the screen leveled out. That's it, said the voice. Good job. What's your current altitude? She read the dial through the flickering lights. 17,000 feet and dropping. Copy that. You need to stabilize at 15,000. Maintain your current pitch. Emma's hands burned with tension. The yoke felt alive, twitching against her palms with every gust of wind. Her shoulders ached. Her eyes darted between the altimeter, the throttle, the window, where the night stretched out in endless darkness. Then came a new sound, a low, grinding moan. She turned to see smoke thickening near the base of the right control panel. A warning light blinked red. Engine 2 failing. Atlanta Center. She shouted. I think the second engine's going. It's smoking. Copy that. Flight 237. We see the heat drop on our end. You're flying on one engine now. You'll need to compensate with rudder. Left pedal, gentle pressure. Emma looked down. The floor pedals glinted under the dim light. She hesitated, then pressed the left one lightly. The plane steadied again. Perfect, the voice said. You're doing great, Emma. What's your current heading? She blinked at the compass. 257. Good. Keep her there. We're clearing airspace for you. You're going to have to prepare for an emergency landing. Her heart nearly stopped. Landing? No, I can't land this thing. You can, and you will, the controller said, his tone unwavering. We'll talk you through every step. For now, keep her steady. You've got about 20 minutes of fuel left. The number hit her like ice. 20 minutes. Behind the cockpit door, chaos rumbled. Voices shouting, crying, praying. She could almost feel their fear pressing through the thin walls, hundreds of souls clinging to her trembling hands. Then Jack's voice came faintly from behind her. Emma, are you okay up there? She turned slightly. The Marine was at the doorway, his face pale, his eyes wide but steady. Barely, she said, her voice cracking. He looked past her, at the unconscious captain, and swallowed hard. "He's gone?" She nodded. Jack took a breath, stepped closer. "Okay, then it's just us now." She looked at him, desperation flashing in her eyes. "I can't do this, Jack. I don't even know what half of these buttons do." He put a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "Hey, you're doing it already. You got this far. That means something." Her breath hitched. "I'm flying a plane, Jack. 200 people behind us. What if I kill them? What if you save them?" He countered. "Your choice." Something in his voice, calm, resolute, military, steadied her pulse. She turned back to the controls, exhaling through clenched teeth. "Atlanta Center," Jack said into the radio. "This is passenger Jack Cooper. I'll be assisting Miss Calloway. Give us whatever you've got." The controller's voice came back instantly. "Copy, Jack. Good to have you on comms. Emma's doing excellent. Keep her focused. You're approximately 70 miles from Hartsfield-Jackson. We'll line you up for runway 27. Emma bit her lip, staring at the glowing horizon ahead. 70 miles? "That's right," the controller said. "We're gonna bring you home." For a few precious moments, the cabin calmed. The alarms quieted, the vibrations softened. The night sky opened wide around them, dark blue, serene, endless. Then a sharp bang shook the cockpit. The plane dipped violently to the left. Emma screamed, clutching the yoke as the horizon spun sideways. "What was that?" Jack shouted. "Hydraulic pressure failure." The controller's voice came, tense now. "You've lost partial control of your stabilizer. Emma, you'll need to manually correct. Trim wheel on your right. Turn it counterclockwise 2 full rotations." Emma's fingers scrambled for the wheel, finding it vibrating violently under her palm. She twisted 1, 2 turns. The resistance was brutal. Her arm shook, but slowly the plane leveled again. "That's it," the controller barked. "Keep turning until it feels steady. You're fighting gravity and wind right now. Stay with it." She gritted her teeth, forcing the wheel through another rotation. Sweat dripped into her eyes. "Emma," Jack said softly, "look outside." She blinked through the cockpit window. The storm clouds had broken apart, revealing the faint glow of city lights below. Tiny constellations of gold scattered across the black earth. Civilization? Her heart twisted. So close, yet still so far. "Atlanta Center," she gasped. "I can see the city." "Copy that. Flight 237. We've got you on radar. You're lined up for approach in approximately 12 minutes. Keep her level and don't descend below 10,000 feet until instructed." She nodded, barely hearing. Her eyes were locked on the faint twinkle of runway lights miles away, hope flickering in the distance. But hope can be cruel. The left engine coughed, once, twice, then stopped. The plane shuddered violently, tilting into a sickening descent. The cockpit filled with alarms again. Engine 1 fail flashing red. "Atlanta Center." Emma screamed. "Both engines. They're gone. I've lost power." Static. Then the controller's voice, firmer now. "Okay, Emma, listen to me. You're going to glide. Don't pull up too much. Maintain your pitch. You've still got control." "I can't. The plane's too heavy." "Yes, you can. You trained once, right? With your father?" Her heart stopped. "How do you know that?" "I read it in the captain's log," the voice replied quickly. "He wrote about you, said you had a natural feel for flight. You just have to trust the air. Let it carry you." Emma's vision blurred. Her father's voice echoed in memory. "The air isn't your enemy, Em. It's your partner. Listen to it, and it'll keep you safe." She loosened her grip slightly, adjusting the yoke with care. The descent steadied. "That's it," the controller said softly. "You've got it." Jack looked at her in awe. "You're really doing this?" Emma didn't answer. She couldn't. Every nerve, every muscle, every breath was focused on the trembling machine in her hands. The runway lights grew larger, a glittering promise through the night. The controller's voice came one last time. "Flight 237. You're cleared for emergency landing on runway 27. You're almost home. Keep her steady. 3 degrees down. Don't overcorrect. You're going to make it." Emma's voice broke. "Copy that." The wind screamed around them. The altimeter ticked downward minus 5,000 feet. 4,000. Jack braced himself. "Whatever happens," he said, "you've already done the impossible." She met his eyes for a fleeting moment, a shared silence between terror and hope. Then she whispered to herself, almost inaudible, "Dad, guide me." The ground was coming closer, too fast. From the cockpit window, the runway lights stretched like veins of gold through the blackness, blinking rhythmically beneath the storm's fading edge. Emma Calloway gripped the yoke with both trembling hands. Her knuckles were white, her breath sharp and shallow. The plane was gliding now. No engines, no power, just air pressure and instinct. The silence inside the cabin was broken only by the wind screaming over the fuselage and the haunting wail of warning alarms. "Atlanta Center, this is Flight 237. She shouted into the radio, voice shaking. "We've lost both engines. Repeat, we are in full glide. How do I bring her down?" The radio crackled back immediately, the controller's tone steady, despite the tension in his words. "Emma, listen to me. You're still high enough. You're descending at a stable rate. I need you to extend your flaps. Lower left lever, second row, move it down 1 notch. Emma found the flap lever, pulled it down. The plane jolted slightly, the nose dipping before stabilizing again. "Good," the controller said. "That'll give you lift. Now, aim for the end of the runway lights, not the beginning. You want a long, shallow descent." Jack was bracing himself against the co-pilot's seat, eyes locked on the windshield. "We're really going in for it," he muttered. Emma nodded tightly. "I guess so." Her mind flickered with flashes of her father, the smell of jet fuel in the old hangar, his voice echoing, "Every landing's just controlled falling. Em, trust your hands. Don't fight the air, guide it." The memory grounded her. Her shaking eased. "Atlanta Center," she said again, more stable now. Runway visual confirmed. "What's wind direction?" There was a short pause. "Winds are from the south at 12 knots. You'll have a slight crosswind from your right. Correct with rudder input. Just gentle pressure." "Copy," she replied, adjusting her feet on the pedals. The lights grew brighter, the earth closer. Behind the cockpit, passengers clung to each other in prayer and disbelief. A child's voice rose over the sobs. "Mommy, are we gonna crash?" And the mothers whispered, "No, baby. Not with her flying." The words reached Emma faintly through the half-open door. She swallowed hard. "Not with her flying." A sudden gust hit the plane. The right wing dipped violently. The entire aircraft tilted at a terrifying angle. Screams erupted from the cabin. "Counter with the yoke," shouted Jack. Emma fought it, pulling left. The yoke resisted, trembling against her grip. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd lost it. Then the plane leveled again, just above the storm's final gust. "Nice recovery," the controller said, his voice now carrying a hint of awe. "You're on course. 2 miles out. 2 miles." She whispered. Her eyes burned with tears. She didn't have time to cry. "Gear down," the controller instructed. "Right lever, pull. Emma reached for the gear lever, pulled it down. The heavy clunk of the landing gear deploying echoed through the plane, followed by a green light. "Gear down and locked," she confirmed, just as her father would have. Jack smiled faintly. "You sound like a pro." "I'm just pretending," she said through a shaky laugh. The runway loomed ahead, wide, black, shining faintly from rain. The landing lights flashed in rhythm, calling her home. "Altitude?" she asked. 300 feet, the controller replied. "You're almost there. Don't flare yet. Keep it steady." The descent was smooth now. Too smooth. The silence was unnatural. Emma felt it deep in her bones, that eerie calm before fate decides which way the story ends. 200 feet. "Slight right correction," the voice said. She nudged the rudder. "Good. Now, Emma, when I say flare, pull gently on the yoke. That'll lift your nose just before touchdown." Her pulse thundered. "Okay, 100 feet." The runway filled the windshield. The lights blurred in her teary vision. 50. Her breath hitched. 30, 20. Flare, flare. Emma pulled. The nose lifted. The wheels screamed as they hit the tarmac. Boom, boom. Sparks spraying across the night. The aircraft bounced once, twice, then roared forward, gliding fast down the runway. "Deploy reverse thrust." The controller barked. She froze. "We don't have engines." "Then use manual brakes. Top of the pedals." She slammed her feet down. The plane groaned, tires screeching, vibrations shaking through every bolt and beam. The lights rushed past in a blur of gold and white. The passengers screamed as the plane skidded, fishtailing slightly before finally slowing slower, slower, until it came to a crawling halt halfway down the runway. Then silence. A silence so heavy it felt sacred. The wind hissed softly against the fuselage. A distant thunder rumbled, the last echo of the storm that had nearly claimed them. Emma's hands still clung to the yoke, trembling uncontrollably. Her chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. Jack exhaled beside her, his voice breaking with disbelief. You did it." She couldn't speak, couldn't even process it. Her vision swam. Through the cockpit window, she saw emergency vehicles rushing toward them, flashing red and blue lights slicing through the darkness. "Flight 237, came the voice through the radio, now softer, full of relief. "You're on the ground. Repeat, you're safe." "You did it, Emma." Her lips parted, but only a whisper came out. "We made it?" "Yes," the controller said. "You made it." Behind them, the cabin erupted in cries, screams of joy, of release, of disbelief. Strangers hugged each other, weeping. The mother from before clutched her child tight, whispering, "Told you she'd do it." Emma unbuckled, rising on weak legs. Her knees nearly gave out. Jack caught her arm. "Hey," he said softly. "It's over. You brought us home." She shook her head faintly. "No, the captain did. My dad did. I just listened." They stepped into the cabin together. Passengers stared at her as though she were something other than human. Part miracle, part myth. Someone started clapping, then another. Within seconds, the entire cabin filled with applause, thunderous, shaking applause that drowned out every alarm still echoing faintly in the distance. Emma's eyes filled with tears she couldn't hold back anymore. She covered her face, sobbing, not from fear this time, but from the unbearable weight of relief. Outside, the emergency vehicles reached the aircraft, sirens cutting off as firefighters and medics swarmed the scene. The smell of jet fuel mixed with rain and burnt metal. They opened the cabin door. Cool night air rushed in, clean and alive. Emma stepped out into the floodlights, the first survivor to touch the ground. The rain hit her face, cold and real, washing away the smoke and sweat. She looked up at the sky, still dark, but vast and open. For the first time since takeoff, she smiled. Jack came beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Guess you're officially a pilot now," he said with a shaky grin. She laughed through her tears. "I was only in 21A, she murmured. "I just wanted to get home." He looked at her with something like awe. "You got all of us home." In the distance, the faint voice of air traffic control came through the radio one last time. "Flight 237. Welcome home." The tarmac was chaos. Flashing emergency lights painted everything red and blue, slicing through the misty night. Sirens wailed in the distance, fire hoses hissed softly, and paramedics moved in waves of motion, a surreal dance of urgency around the still, trembling body of Flight 237. Emma Calloway stood outside the aircraft, wrapped in a silver thermal blanket, her body shivering despite the humid Georgia air. The world around her buzzed in fragments, reporters shouting questions, officials barking orders, passengers crying or laughing hysterically as they embraced their loved ones. But Emma couldn't hear any of it. Her ears rang with silence, the kind that only follows catastrophe. Jack stood beside her, blood crusted on his temple, a bruise forming along his jaw. "You need to sit," he told her, gently guiding her toward a medic van. "I'm fine," she murmured, but her voice was barely a whisper. Her eyes drifted toward the open cockpit door, where two EMTs worked under harsh floodlights. Captain Hayes's body was still inside, covered with a white sheet. A lump rose in her throat. They should treat him first. Jack followed her gaze, his expression tightening. "They can't. He's gone." Emma turned away. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she forced herself to stay upright. A FEMA investigator approached, clipboard in hand, his suit damp from the drizzle. "Miss Calloway?" She blinked at him, disoriented. "Yes, I'm Agent Morris. Federal Transportation Safety Board. I need a brief statement before we move you to the terminal." She nodded numbly. "Okay." He glanced down at his notes, then back at her. "You were listed as a passenger in seat 21A, correct?" "Yes, and according to the black box transmission, the captain called for you by name?" Her throat went dry. "He did. Do you know why?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking back toward the aircraft. "He said he knew my father, Mark Calloway. He was a flight instructor years ago." Morris scribbled something. "Your father, the one who died in the 2005 Everglade crash?" "Yes," she whispered. He nodded slowly, as if that piece of the puzzle made too much sense and none at all. "And you've had some flight training?" "Barely," she said. "Just a few simulator sessions with my dad." "I was 12. Morris looked up, incredulous. "And you landed that plane?" Her voice cracked. "I didn't land it. The tower did. I just listened." He watched her for a long moment, then softened. "Listening saved 213 people tonight. That's not just anything." She didn't respond. Her eyes were on the dark silhouette of the aircraft, its fuselage scorched and streaked with smoke, resting silently against the rain-slicked runway. In the distance, the first cameras began flashing. News vans had already gathered at the perimeter fence. The story was breaking. Passenger lands plane after pilot dies mid-air. Jack noticed it too. "They're gonna swarm you," he muttered. "You ready for that?" Emma shook her head. "I don't think I'll ever be ready." 2 hours later, she sat inside a dimly lit terminal lounge, a blanket still draped around her shoulders. The chaos outside had been replaced by the hum of security radios and the clicking of journalists, cameras behind glass barriers. A stewardess, the same one who had held the crying child, approached quietly and placed a cup of tea on the table before her. "They said it's calming," she offered gently. Emma smiled faintly. "Thank you." The woman hesitated. "We all owe you our lives." Emma looked up at her, eyes heavy with exhaustion. "You don't owe me anything. We owe the captain." The stewardess's eyes glistened. "He told you to fly, didn't he?" Emma nodded slowly. "His last words." The woman placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then maybe he knew exactly who you were supposed to be." She turned and walked away, leaving Emma in silence again. Jack returned moments later, holding 2 bottles of water. "Here," he said, sitting across from her. His uniform was replaced with a gray hoodie and jeans, borrowed from emergency supplies. Emma took the bottle, turning it absently in her hands. "They're saying I saved them," she murmured. "But I can't stop seeing his face. The way he looked when he said it, 'You're the pilot now.' It didn't sound like an order. It sounded like he knew he was handing something over." Jack studied her quietly. "Maybe he was." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "Maybe it wasn't random," Jack said. "You said he trained under your dad, right? Maybe when he saw you on the manifest, it meant something to him. Maybe he saw it as coming full circle." Emma shook her head. "That's too poetic for what happened. He died. I survived. That's it." Jack leaned forward. "You survived because of him. And because you listened to the one thing everyone else couldn't, your instincts. That's not luck." Before she could respond, a uniformed man entered, Captain Hayes's insignia still glimmering faintly in his hand. He approached Emma quietly and set it down on the table before her, the captain's gold wings. She looked up at him in confusion. "What's this?" The man's voice was low, respectful. The captain's log said, in case of emergency, these were to be given to the person who ensured the crew's safety if he couldn't. It's what he called his final flight tradition. Emma stared at the wings, gleaming under the fluorescent light. They were heavy, solid, impossibly real. "He left them for me?" she whispered. The man nodded. "He wrote your name. Emma Calloway." Her heart stopped. Tears welled again, hot and sharp. She brushed them away quickly, shaking her head. "I don't deserve these." Jack's voice was soft. "You earned them." She closed her hand over the wings, feeling their cold metal against her skin. By dawn, the storm had cleared. The wrecked aircraft sat like a sleeping giant under the rising sun. Reporters lined the fences, microphones flashing. Headlines scrolled across morning news channels. "Passenger becomes pilot minus 213. Survive miracle flight. Calloway legacy lives on in the skies. The voice that brought them home." Emma watched from the terminal window, her reflection ghosting over the sunrise. She barely recognized herself. Pale, bruised, eyes hollow, yet alive. Jack joined her silently, 2 coffees in hand. "They're waiting for you outside," he said. "The press, the investigators, probably a movie studio by noon." Emma laughed weakly. "I just wanted to get home. I didn't ask for any of this." He looked at her thoughtfully. "Maybe home isn't a place anymore. Maybe it's what you just did, finding calm when everything falls apart." She turned to face him. "You talk like someone who's seen too much." He smiled faintly. "Marine torse'll do that to you." For a moment, they stood in silence. Then Emma asked quietly, "Do you think he knew?" "The captain? That I could actually do it?" Jack glanced toward the plane. He didn't have to know. He just had to believe. Later that morning, as Emma was escorted out toward a waiting car, she paused beside the nose of Flight 237. The sunlight glinted across the shattered glass of the cockpit, her seat of terror, her seat of rebirth. She reached out and touched the cool metal. "Thank you," she whispered, not just to the plane, but to everyone who had believed she could bring it home. The wind picked up, carrying the faint smell of fuel and rain. Somewhere, she thought she could almost hear her father's voice again. Steady, warm, full of that unshakable confidence she'd long forgotten. "The sky doesn't take, Em. It teaches. You just have to listen." She smiled faintly, closing her eyes. That night, when the world called her a hero, Emma Calloway didn't answer. She sat alone in her hotel room, the captain's wings resting beside her on the nightstand, the distant sound of jet engines echoing through the window. She stared at them for a long time, then whispered into the dark, "I wasn't supposed to be in 21A." And for the first time since the crash, she allowed herself to cry, not out of fear or guilt, but gratitude. Because somewhere between terror and trust, between life and loss, she had become something new. Not just a survivor, not just a pilot, but the voice that listened and answered. The world moved on, but Emma Calloway couldn't. 3 days had passed since Flight 237's miraculous landing, and yet every time she closed her eyes, she was still there. The deafening alarms, the trembling yoke in her hands. Captain Hayes's fading voice saying those impossible words. "You're the pilot now." The media called her the girl who flew. But in the quiet of her hotel room, with blackout curtains drawn and the sound of airplanes faintly echoing overhead, she felt like an imposter. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, had launched a full investigation. They'd interviewed the crew, retrieved the black box, and pieced together the chaos second by second. But there were still gaps, strange silences in the recordings, moments no one could explain. That morning, she was summoned to the federal building downtown. Agent Morris, the same man who'd questioned her on the runway, met her in the hallway outside a conference room. His suit was pressed, his tone clipped. "Miss Calloway, thank you for coming." Emma nodded, nervous. "You said you found something new?" He held the door open for her. "We did, and it concerns you directly." Inside the room, monitors flickered with graphs and readouts. A team of investigators sat behind laptops, the hum of their machines filling the silence. At the center of the table lay a black device, small but unmistakably heavy, the flight recorder. Morris gestured for her to sit. "We've been reviewing the final cockpit audio. You heard part of it before, but there's a segment the press doesn't have. It was scrambled due to interference." Emma frowned. "Interference?" He nodded. "Something disrupted the transmission, likely from an outdated beacon frequency. But we managed to clean it up." He clicked a button. Static crackled through the speakers. Then came Captain Hayes's voice, calm, composed, though thinner than before. "Atlanta Center, this is 237, requesting immediate medical priority. Captain unresponsive." That was Jack's voice, steady but urgent. Then, faint breathing, the kind Emma would never forget. "Emma Calloway," Hayes whispered, his voice trembling. Emma froze. Hearing it again sent a shiver down her spine. "Captain?" Jack said on the recording. "Who's that?" "Seat 21A, tell her. She knows what to do." Static swallowed the rest. Then came another voice, softer, like a ghost echoing through the frequency. "Hayes, focus on your instruments. You're not alone." Emma's heart stopped. She recognized that voice instantly. Her father's. She gripped the edge of the table. "Play that again." Morris exchanged a glance with his colleague, hesitated, and then replayed it. "Hayes, focus on your instruments. You're not alone." It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. The same timbre, the same calm cadence she'd heard in every childhood flight video her father recorded before the Everglade crash. Morris studied her. You hear it too. That's impossible, she said softly. He's been dead for 20 years. The room was silent. Even the investigators stopped typing. Morris leaned forward. We ran the waveform against archived training tapes from Mark Calloway's flight school. It's a 96% match. Hayes must have carried an old recording on board, possibly a training audio. Emma blinked in disbelief. You mean Hayes had my father's voice with him? Yes, but the timing's strange, Morris said, scrolling through the timeline. It only played after the captain collapsed, as if triggered automatically. She frowned. Triggered? He nodded. Like an alert. A beacon tied to his vitals. We think Hayes had a medical condition he didn't disclose, a heart issue. The file name embedded in the cockpit system reads, Callaway_protocol.wav. Emma stared at him, stunned. My father's name? Why? That's what we're trying to find out. Later that evening, Emma sat alone in a quiet diner off the highway, turning the captain's wings over in her hands. The waitress poured her coffee and left her be, sensing the weight she carried. She played the moment over and over in her head. Why would a pilot she'd never met carry her father's voice file? Why call for her specifically? She pulled out her phone and searched the FAA archives for Hayes plus Callaway. A handful of results appeared, an old training roster, a flight school record, a weathered photo of her father standing beside a young Hayes in uniform. Her breath caught. They'd known each other. Her father had been his instructor. Suddenly, memories returned, faint but sharp. A tall man with kind eyes visiting their home when she was little. Her father saying, "That's James Hayes, one of my best." It hit her like a wave. Captain Hayes hadn't been calling a random passenger. He'd been calling his mentor's daughter. That realization haunted her for days. When she returned to the NTSB for a follow-up, Morris told her they'd discovered more. Captain Hayes had been diagnosed with a rare arrhythmia 6 months prior, but continued flying against doctor's orders. He had installed a fail-safe system in the cockpit, one that, if he lost consciousness, would activate a voice recording linked to his last training protocol, the Callaway Protocol. It wasn't coincidence. It was faith, misplaced or otherwise, in the idea that Emma Callaway might one day hear her father's voice again, and that she would know what to do. Hayes believed in you, Morris said quietly as she stared at the evidence. He designed that system himself. His logs show he updated it just last month, the day before your flight. Emma shook her head. But why now? Why me? Morris hesitated. Maybe he wanted redemption. Maybe he thought your father's teaching could save lives one more time. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She left her hotel and drove to the airfield where Flight 237's remains still sat under tarp and floodlights. Security was light. A guard recognized her face and let her through. She stepped onto the tarmac, the wind cold against her skin. The massive jet loomed ahead like a wounded animal, stripped and silent. She climbed the maintenance stairs and entered the cockpit. Everything was just as she remembered, the panels dark, the smell of burned plastic faint in the air. She sat in the captain's seat, staring at the empty co-pilot chair. I'm back, she whispered into the stillness. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, from somewhere deep within the avionics system, a faint static hum crackled to life. Her pulse quickened. Hello? The speaker hissed softly. Then, a voice. The sky doesn't take, Em. It teaches. Her breath caught. It was the same line. The same voice. She swallowed hard, tears welling. Dad? The static flickered, then faded. Silence. Emma sat frozen, the only sound her uneven breathing. She didn't know if what she heard was real, a glitch, a memory, or something in between. But for the first time, the fear that had lived in her chest since that night began to ease. Captain Hayes hadn't left her a burden. He'd left her a message, a bridge between the past and the sky. As dawn rose, she walked out of the plane and watched the horizon glow orange. Reporters would arrive soon, and the world would ask for another interview. But Emma knew she didn't owe them another story. The real story wasn't about her heroism. It was about connection, between two pilots bound by legacy, between a father and daughter separated by decades, between faith and instinct when both engines of logic fail. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Captain, for believing in me." Then, clutching the gold wings to her heart, she made a silent vow. She would learn to fly, for real this time. Not because of fear, not because of fame, but because somewhere, someone had trusted her with the sky. Emma Calloway stood at the edge of the small regional airfield, the early morning sun casting long golden shadows across the tarmac. The world seemed quiet here, apart from the distant hum of engines warming up and the occasional call of a flight instructor. This was no commercial terminal. No flashing lights. No screaming reporters. Only the endless sky and a single waiting aircraft, a small Cessna 172, gleaming like a promise. She traced her fingers over the gold wings resting in her hand, the emblem of Captain Hayes and the man she had always known as her father's voice. She had carried them everywhere since that miraculous night. Now they felt heavier, not from metal, but from responsibility. Jack Cooper stood beside her, arms crossed, face unreadable. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked. His tone was firm, but the softness in his eyes betrayed him. Emma nodded slowly, inhaling deeply. "I have to. Not for the headlines. Not for anyone else. For them." She gestured to the sky. "For my dad. And for Captain Hayes." He studied her for a long moment. "I thought surviving that flight would be the end of it." "Surviving?" she repeated quietly. "No, Jack. That was only the beginning. Everything else, the fear, the hesitation, it's over. This flight, this is the proof that I can actually fly, that I can belong up there." Jack shook his head, a half-smile forming. "You've already belonged, Em. You just didn't know it." Inside the small cockpit, the smell of fuel and polished metal filled her senses. The Cessna was familiar to her from childhood. She had spent weekends with her father in a similar model, watching him lift off the runway with effortless grace. The yoke was smaller than the Boeing 737s she had once fought for control of, but the principle was the same. Trust the aircraft, trust the air, trust yourself. Emma buckled herself in. Her hands hovered over the controls, trembling slightly, though not from fear. From anticipation. From the gravity of the moment. "Remember," Jack said from the doorway, "I'm right behind you on the radio. I won't let you fail." She smiled faintly. "I won't." The engine roared to life. The vibrations hummed through her body, awakening memories from her father's lessons. The way he spoke to the plane, gently coaxing it, never forcing it. She taxied onto the runway, checked the instruments, and glanced at the horizon. The sky was endless, a palette of pale blues and soft pinks. It felt alive, as if waiting for her. And maybe it had been waiting all along. The takeoff was smooth. Emma eased the throttle forward, feeling the familiar rush as the wheels lifted from the ground. For a brief second, she felt weightless, the very sensation she had felt on Flight 237, but now guided by her own hands. She remembered the chaos, the panic, the night she had been thrust into responsibility beyond her imagination. But this time, there was no fear. There was only control, clarity, and a strange serenity. Jack's voice came through the radio. "You're looking good, Em. Keep your pitch steady and trust the trim. Emma adjusted gently, recalling the mantra her father had always repeated. The sky doesn't take. It teaches. She exhaled and let her hands move almost automatically, syncing with the rhythm of the aircraft. As she climbed higher, the memories of Flight 237 returned. The alarms, the smoke, the captain's final words. You're the pilot now. Each had carved a mark into her soul. And now, with the wind rushing past her, the city sprawling below like a map of possibilities, she understood. It wasn't about survival. It was about choice. About courage. About listening to the air, to her instincts, to the voices that had guided her long before she ever stepped into a cockpit. She glanced at the gold wings beside her on the dashboard, reflecting sunlight. She whispered, "Thank you. Both of you." The radio crackled. "Approaching 10,000 feet, Emma. How do you feel?" "Alive," she said simply. Her voice carried a calm confidence she hadn't known she possessed a week ago. "Good," Jack replied. "Let's take her higher. Get a real look at the sky." Emma banked gently to the right, and the landscape unfurled beneath her. Forests, rivers, and the sprawling city now bathed in morning light. Clouds brushed against the tips of the mountains in the distance, and for a moment she laughed, a pure, unburdened sound that felt like it belonged to the wind itself. She imagined her father beside her, smiling, nodding, and Captain Hayes, perhaps finally at peace, knowing the responsibility he had passed on had been accepted with courage. Hours passed like minutes. She practiced turns, climbs, and descents, feeling the plane respond to every subtle adjustment. Every movement was a conversation between her and the machine, her and the sky, her and the legacy she now carried. Eventually, she leveled at 15,000 feet and looked around. The horizon seemed infinite, stretching beyond what she could see. A thought struck her. The sky would always be there, vast and unpredictable, just waiting for someone willing to listen. And now she was ready. When she returned to the airfield, her landing was flawless. Smooth, controlled, deliberate, everything she had fought to achieve on Flight 237, refined and mastered. As she taxied to the hangar, she felt a rush of clarity. Fear could be overcome, chaos could be endured, and miracles could happen, not by luck, but by listening, trusting, and acting. Jack was waiting beside the hangar, clapping softly. That was incredible. Emma unbuckled and stepped out of the cockpit, breathing deeply. "It feels different when it's your own hands guiding it," she said. "You've always had it in you," Jack said. "You just didn't know it yet." The sun rose higher, casting golden light over the runway and illuminating the mountains in the distance. Emma stood beside the plane, holding the gold wings. She imagined them lifting from her hands, carried into the wind, symbols of trust, courage, and legacy. She felt a quiet strength settle in her chest. For the first time since that night over Atlanta, she was no longer 2-1A. She was a pilot, fully, undeniably, unshakably. The voices of her father and Captain Hayes echoed softly in her mind. The sky doesn't take. It teaches. And Emma Calloway, who had once only listened from a seat among strangers, had finally understood the lesson. She looked up. The clouds parted just enough for sunlight to pour through, illuminating the tarmac, the plains, and her path forward. It was hers now. The sky was hers. And somewhere, beyond the horizon, she imagined two figures smiling, watching, proud, knowing their lesson had been passed on. Emma closed her eyes and whispered, "I'll make you proud. I promise." The wind rushed past her face. The engines hummed. And the future, vast, open, limitless, waited. End of Part 8. Conclusion. Emma had gone from terrified passenger to reluctant pilot, from chaos to control, from doubt to mastery. Her journey honored both her father and Captain Hayes, bridging past and present, fear and courage. She was no longer defined by where she sat. She had claimed the sky.